that we're hosting today. I hope you've all had a lovely day today, and you have at least been enjoying what life has had to offer during the day. And let me thank you for making the time to be with us this evening. My name is Vicky Karuga, and I run a company called Profiles International. And we do a series of webinars on various topics every month. So feel free to join our mailing list, and we shall always make sure that we invite you to all our webinars. So I will just ask us to give everyone up to about 4:33 or 4:34, and they can join in. If you have a friend who had said that they were joining in and you can't see them, just give them a quick reminder that we are now logged in, and then we can give everyone just a couple more minutes. And then we start. We have a very exciting guest today, and he's very ready to share with us what he knows, and also to entertain the questions. When you do come in, please mute your mics for the comfort of everyone. And remember that if you have any questions, put them on the chat group so that we can take them along. I'll be writing down the questions that I receive from the chat, and then I will share them with James after he's finished with what we're discussing. So let's give it just one more minute until about 4:34, and then I will be introducing to you your guests, and then we can start. Supporting me on the back end is Rose, Awino, and Edna. Thank you very much, Rose and Edna, also for always making this happen. And I'll allow us to send reminders to those of us who wanted to join in. So just one moment of silence. Okay, it is now 4:35. Again, let me thank you all for being present today as we're listening to the topic of our webinar, which is why Parliament wants to make after work calls illegal. I know we have had quite a bit of debate, or we've had our colleagues really discussing this particular bill, and it's not been one of the ones that has not been without controversy. But all in all, it is there, it is here to stay. And we thought, what better way to discuss it than to call in the experts. And some of you who have not seen me post what James WaNjeri keeps sharing with us, some of his thoughts, his opinions, and actually his expert opinion in some of the matters that we have seen touch on our legal system, and also touch on us as people who are stewarding talent, human talent and human relations. So with that, I want to just introduce him. He's a friend of mine, and at the same time, he's one person who is very easy to share on what he has learned in this arena of law and, of course, employment law. He practices as a commercial lawyer, specializing in employment and labor law. And he is now the author of the newsletter I think I post on all the forums I'm in, the Law of Work newsletter. So he keeps us abreast and posted. You can really get in touch with him if you're in that funny quagmire where you're not sure which way to follow or what is what the law says about a certain matter, or you just need legal expertise on something. But it is his philosophy to ensure that everyone keeps educated, everyone keeps informed, because there have been so many changes towards how we handle people, and not only just from a perspective of how the world is changing, but from a perspective of the legal implications themselves. So I think without talking too much, I want to invite James into this conversation, and I think I want to have him first introduce himself to us and tell us why employment law. And this is from me to you. Over to you, James.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And just to echo what Vicky shared, thank you to everyone who's been able to join us this evening. I hope we'll have a great time of learning and discussion. Why employment law? I think I'm a people person, so everywhere I worked, I always found myself being given responsibility over people, so managing them. So I think it's one of those practice areas that came naturally to me. So while we do handle the different areas in commercial law, this has been one of the areas I thought it would be good to just also develop a material on.
So that's very interesting. I think the arena of people is one that people find themselves because they're drawn to kind of that area. I have heard a few practitioners mention that they were formerly somewhere else, but they find themselves being drawn to address people matters. It seems to be a calling.
It is. It's a calling, I think. And it's not something everyone is able to do. I think it's also challenging. I don't think the assumption is that it's very easy.
Okay, so you'll allow me to hand this over to you so that you can share with us what you have for us today. So take it away, James. And thank you for agreeing to come in and be part of this forum for our listeners as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I see a few familiar people. Welcome. Today we want to discuss, there is a bill that is in the Senate. It's called the Amendment Bill 2022, and some of the changes that the bill seeks to introduce. Now, just as in form of a background, this bill was actually in the previous parliament, and it had gone through a couple of the steps, but unfortunately, by the time Parliament was closing for the general elections last year, it had not been voted on. So the Senator, Gay, who had introduced it in 2021, also now sought to reintroduce it. So I think if you go online, you might find that you'll see that there's also a 2021 bill. The contents are the same, and it's the same thing he seeks to carry out. So as Vicky said, my name is James WaNjeri. I am an advocate of the High Court. We've done some work with her in other areas in terms of
previous life.
Yes, in the previous life. And so today we want to look at this bill that talks about disconnecting from work. And maybe I should start by just asking, where were you in March 2020 when the first COVID case was reported in Kenya, and suddenly everyone was buying tissue paper? I don't know where you are at that time, but 2020 was such an important time for us, especially in our work, because suddenly we were forced to now begin to do things in a different way. Those of us who worked in spaces where you are required to be in the office every day, suddenly you are now being told you can work from home. This working from home had been a concept that we would hear about, but from March 2020, it became almost like a full-time thing. We also saw the growth of a lot of tech giants offering softwares that enabled the working from home and communication. Zoom was one of them. Microsoft, of course, came with their Teams. And we suddenly discovered that we never really needed to be in the office all the time. And within no time, you begin to realize that your day was full of meetings. Research that was done in the UK showed that over the COVID period, employees on average worked longer hours than when they were actually going to the office. And part of it is because the nature of work when you're working from home is that from the time you log into your, whether you have an office platform or maybe you pick up your laptop and you begin working, you know, the only break you take is to go to the fridge to take something, or maybe to go warm something in the microwave, or maybe just to take a health break where you walk a little and come back. But I remember at the time I was an associate at a law firm, and I would find myself working until 10 p.m. And I think I used to be very proud of the fact that I would work until 10 and I wasn't tired, you know. And over time, there have been discussions now about what that has meant for workers and for employees. And while now there are offices and the employers who have encouraged employees to go back, and for some it has not been encouragement, it has actually been a requirement that they go back to work. We are still finding now that some of you have WhatsApp groups for your workplace, and messages are being posted in the WhatsApp group after you've already left work, maybe at 8 p.m. and maybe your boss is there telling you, do this for me. So that is what this bill seeks to tackle. So I just want to, I had prepared a small presentation here that we'll just go through together. And I hope that it's going to be easy for you to just follow along with us. But before I get into that, I think I just want to know in the comments, is there anyone who feels that perhaps they're in a space where their work and their personal life has become blurred, that in essence, you're finding yourself working beyond what could be considered the reasonable working hours? I'd just like to hear some of those responses, because that's essentially what we'll be dealing with today. All right. Now, we'll be touching, of course, on these amendments, and it's good manners to introduce yourself. Vicky had already done the introduction. As she said, I run a law firm, and it's a commercial practice law firm. And one of the areas that we have a lot of specialization in is in employment law. My philosophy and our firm's philosophy is that in this day and age, you cannot afford to have or to lack legal knowledge. And so we are committed to ensuring that as many people as possible have legal knowledge and awareness, because what you know empowers your decision making, and it informs the decisions that you make. So as a firm, our philosophy is that we are passionate about our work. Our approach to the issues that are brought to us by our clients, we are pragmatic. We are always looking to find solutions that work and solutions that are forward-facing and forward-thinking. And of course, it goes without saying that we are very professional in the execution of that. And our vision as a firm is to actually be at the standard of excellence in legal practice in Kenya and beyond. Now, the Employment Amendment Bill, if you look at that bill, for those who are able to Google, you'll see that the principal object is to provide for the right to disconnect in the digital age. The bill seeks to address increased employee burnout. So digital connectivity is one of the things that is being blamed for slowly eroding leisure time for employees. As I said earlier, you'll find that due to the nature of the digital connectivity and how much digital we are using in our work, digital systems we are using, there are no fixed working hours. And therefore, this means that most employees are finding that they're having to work outside of their working hours and into their personal time. So they're unable to rest, they're unable to take time for themselves, and this leads to employee burnout. So The move of this bill wants us to strike a balance between your work and your private life. And this is targeted towards digital technology. Digital technology should have a positive effect on your life instead of having a negative effect. Now, this bill sets out two terms that I'd like to define for us. The first one is out of work hours. Now, if you go to that amendment, out of work hours means hours other than the hours of work agreed upon between an employer and an employee in the contract of employment. The second thing is the right to disconnect, which means an employee's entitlement not to be contacted by the employer during out of work hours as per the employer's policy. Now, what does this mean for us? What this means is that if you look at your contract will probably say that your working hours are from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. With a lunch break in between. And then, of course, employers will put that clause in the contract that says that the working hours are subject to change, maybe due to the demands of your work. Now, there's going to be a definition stating that these hours from this time, for instance, if you only work 8 to 5, from 5:01 until 7:59 a.m. the next day, those will be considered as out of work hours. Out of work to mean you are not at work and you cannot be handling any work-related matters. The second thing is the right to disconnect. Now, because of the digital age, it's very easy for your boss to send you a WhatsApp message and tell you, have you looked at this? It's very easy to get an email coming in at 8 p.m. Hey, this is urgent. I'd like you to handle this. You actually now, under this amendment, the law wants to provide employees with the right to disconnect and to say no. Under this law, your boss can call you and you can refuse to pick that call. You can get an email and you can refuse to look at it until you get back to your working hours. Now, this bill seeks to amend Section 27 of the Employment Act, and it's introducing a few sections that I'd like to take us through. The first section is Section 27A1, which highlights the right to disconnect. And as we've said, right to disconnect is the right of the employee to actually refuse to take any communications related to work outside of their working hours. Section 27(2) creates an obligation on the employer to create a policy for out of work. Now, this policy will define what out of work means, but it will also determine what are the circumstances in which you can contact an employee during out of work hours. It will also, the policy will also provide for the use of electronic devices. How are electronic devices used? One of the challenges we have at the moment is that some of you probably work for an employer who gives you either a laptop or they're giving you a phone. And I think I remember talking to someone once and they said that they have this phone that it cannot go off because it was bought when they are given the phone by the employer. They're also given a power bank. So that phone can never be off. So this policy will handle such matters. The other thing is that the policy will deal with circumstances where the right can be waived. What are the instances during your work where your right to disconnect can be waived? Are there emergencies? What sort of emergencies? Of course, this will differ from one employer to the other. The other thing as well is that the policy will indicate the nature of compensation that an employee is to receive. So for instance, if we say anytime after 6 p.m. is out of work hours and you're called at 7 and you're given some work and you do it, how do we compensate that work? That policy will need to be able to say that the rate of compensation is X amount for, per hour for the work done. Now, normally policies are created by the employer and the employee comes in and finds that a working space already has its own policies and their work is to just get into that. However, if you have more than 10 employees, the new section 27A3, the proposed section 27A3, states that you must now consult employees while creating the policy, or you consult the trade union. So if you have 10 plus employees, you must consult with your employees as you create this out of work hours policy. The other thing is that under section 27A4, it provides that the right to disconnect shall be subject to the terms and conditions specified under Section 10 of the Employment Act. Section 10 of the Employment Act, of course, is what creates the contractual terms. It says that, for instance, your contract has to specify your working hours. It has to specify where you'll be working from. All those things, that right to disconnect shall be subject to those terms. So in essence, the contractual terms that you already have are being read in tandem with this right. Now, of course, for every law, we say, for every rule, there is a limitation, right? There are no absolutes, and if there are, they are very few. So 27A5 provides a limitation where, in case of an emergency, where an emergency has arisen and it touches on work that falls within your responsibility, then in such instances, your right to disconnect will be suspended, only in emergencies. So one of the things that the policy will need to determine is what amounts to an emergency. Of course, the law cannot tell us what amounts to an emergency because you have different employers have different needs and different employees are doing different things. So this is one of the things that your policy will need to be able to show. Now, subsection 6 of that section 27A also creates that an employee shall not be reprimanded, punished, or subjected to disciplinary action if the employee disregards a work-related communication during out of work hours. So what does this mean? Your boss calls you at 8 on the phone that they gave you and they told you it can never go. You refuse to pick. They send an email, you refuse to respond. They send you a WhatsApp, you feed them blue ticks. They cannot then call you and give you a notice to show cause the next day because this was during out of work hours. Now, subsection 7 as well provides that where there is no mutually agreed out of work hours, where the parties do not agree and say this period to this period constitutes out of work hours, the employee shall not be obliged to respond. This is this forms part of the protections for employees. And if you respond, then you must be compensated. All right. Now remember, this subsection is clear that this is a situation where there are no mutually agreed out of work hours. Of course, this is likely to bring in a lot of issues because if the hours are not agreed on, how then do you determine the rate of compensation? Now, unfortunately, this amendment, if passed, will not apply to everyone. Those in essential services, as specified under Section 81 of the Labor Relations Act, will not be allowed to have the right to disconnect. So these are people in water supply services, hospital services, so you have doctors, nurses, and anyone working in that sort of setup, air traffic control services and civil aviation telecommunication services. So anyone employed by KCAA, maybe you work at the airport at JKIA or Pilson. Fire services, you're a fire marshal, you will not have the right to disconnect. Post authority, local government authorities, maybe you work for the counties, you do not have the right to disconnect. And those also working in ferry services, because these are considered essential services. Now, it will be keen to note that in terms of the essential service, the reason why it has been limited to Section 81 is because many of you remember that when COVID struck and curfews were imposed, one of the things that happened is certain bodies went to court and began to get orders to be declared as essential service providers, including lawyers. So as you can clearly see, lawyers don't make part of this list for those lawyers who are attending, because this is only limited to Section 81. Now, what happens if you are an employer who decides, I don't care about this, I will call you anytime, we'll continue working as we are? Well, if you are convicted, if you do this first, that is an offense, right? And if you're convicted, you'll be fined an amount not exceeding 500,000 shillings or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 1 year or to both. Of course, this comes with challenges. Is there any employee who can report their employer for flouting this rule and they still maintain their job? So it's a bit challenging, but that is what the law provides. So, of course, those who create the law know that it's easier to break the law than to keep it. And so they have to offer a stiff penalty for those who seek to break the law. Now, this question of the right to disconnect is not just coming out of nowhere. France was the first country in the world to actually pass a law regarding the right to disconnect. Now, the European Union has defined the right to disconnect as a worker's right to disengage from work and to refrain from engaging in work-related electronic communications, such as emails or other message during non-work hours. So this touches on communication. Now, it is key to note that the European Union has not actually passed a law on the right to disconnect. However, there is a directive that was issued in January 2021 for this to be established. Nevertheless, several countries in Europe have already gone ahead to pass their own laws, their own internal laws on this matter. They're listed there. We have France, we have Ireland, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, and Spain. Kenya, if this passes, Kenya will be the first country in Africa to actually pass such a law. Now, as you also talk about global comparisons, it has also been noted that a lot of the multinationals, especially in the European Union, have also taken this up. So you'll find that some of the big companies have already set up their own internal policies on the right to disconnect, and they do not wait for the law to pass, since these are some of the obligations that they feel that they have. All right. Now, what have been some of the local reactions? Of course, as you can imagine, the Federation of Kenya Employers, led by their CEO, Madam Jacqueline Mugo, they have come out to oppose this amendment. And what they're saying is that it will introduce new stringent measures that will curtail the prerogative to manage enterprises by the owners. This will automatically pose a challenge to industrial relations in Kenya. If passed, it will create two centers of managerial power and cause disharmony and indiscipline in the workplaces. I mean, those are very sharp views. And of course, if you look at it from an employer's perspective, the employer wants to feel that they can contact you at any time, right? And even where maybe you work in a place where you're not contacted beyond hours, employers perhaps also want the flexibility to know that if they do contact you, then there is no punishment that comes to you. I listened to Jacqueline Mugo when she came out with her remarks, and one of the things she highlighted is that part of the challenge you're having with bringing those in the employers in the informal sector on board is that you can imagine if you have, let's say you have a shamba boy, right? Or you have someone who works for you at home. It becomes a bit hard now when such a matter is introduced to you. And maybe even, let's think about it even in terms of your house help in the house. What are her working hours in terms of out of work? You know, because in essence, this is a house manager and they are working maybe from morning to evening. If, for instance, that work ends at 7 and there's no dinner at 8, in that instance, then what happens? So, I mean, it's going to be quite a challenge. I do not agree with her in terms of two centers of managerial power. I think that on her part, she's going a bit overboard. because there's only one center of managerial power. Now, COTU is the body that is mandated with fighting for the rights of employees in Kenya. And it's interesting that the remarks of the Secretary General, Mr. Francis Atwoli, he says that even in the developed world, many people work overtime to make extra coins. When they leave their workstations, they go and work elsewhere. The bill is not progressive to a developing country, Kenya, and we reject it in totality. Overtime issues are well gazetted per sector, per grade, as per the collective bargaining agreement or terms of reference the employee entered into with the employer at the time of employment. Of course, one of the things that's clear is that Mr. Atwoli completely misses the purpose of this bill, because the bill is not preventing anyone from working overtime, or it's not preventing them from leaving their workstations to go work elsewhere. This bill seeks to deal especially with communication beyond work. That is the first thing. In the digital space and in the digital age that we are in, communication, and then the second thing becomes work. Of course, the issue of overtime is well provided for in the law. And as Mr. Atwoli indicates, we do have laws that cater to how overtime is calculated. So it will be a very interesting argument to see if you work during your out of work hours, do we compensate that as overtime, or are we compensating that as out of work compensation? So that's one of the things I'm sure that will come before the court, and the court will need to be able to clarify for us if the bill passes in its present state. That's me. That's the end of our presentation. At least for that, I hope we've been as clear as possible. Those are our office details. This presentation will be shared with you on email. I'll share a copy with Vicky, and if you'd like the same, it will be sent to you. Vicky, I think I have kept time, so over to you.
You've actually been too succinct. I think there are very many questions, at least for me, I feel like there are very many questions that I want to ask you. But I will ask you one question, and then I'll ask one that is from the audience. But my question is, I know Kenya will be the first country, if passed, for this bill to be enacted. But one, are there other countries that are considering it? Passing this same bill because of the things that they have seen? And I can see Richard's question has been answered, where he had said which countries have successfully deployed this proposed bill. So mine is to know whether there are other countries that have actually have considered this bill, not just Kenya. And then my second question is around how will we ensure, and I think that's a question that has been asked by, I saw someone asking it, Grace Waithera. How will we ensure that we are not doing what we said we did in COVID? We became essential services and are still being able to follow our employees way after work has happened? Those two questions from me, and then we can move on to
okay.
We can move on.
Okay. I think in Africa, it's only Kenya so far. Mm-hmm. I have not heard of any other country in Africa that is actually trying to do this. The only other place, as I pointed out, is in Europe, where countries are keen to take it up. I know that currently in Ontario, in Canada, they're actually considering creating their law around this, but Canada, that has not yet been finalized. It's still in the works. Mm-hmm. Now, I think with respect to the second question, how do you ensure that you also now don't become suddenly declared as an essential worker?
Yeah.
You're protected because, as you've seen, Section 81 of the Labor Relations Act limits who can actually, who is an essential worker. That definition is there, and it's stuck there. unless now someone wants to go and amend. You see, in the case, the difference between now and COVID was that during COVID, essential workers were not defined according to the Act. It was actually a policy of the government that was passed. That's why it was easy to challenge it in court and the list was expanded. But when it comes to an act of parliament, if the act limits who an essential worker is, the only way to introduce new people into that list is to actually amend the act through a parliamentary amendment process. Yeah.
Not the one who's lost your voice. Okay, sorry, I think I'm a bit slow. What I'll do is I'll put off my internet for a little bit. Okay, thanks for that. At least about the essential services, it looks like it's a bit difficult. I have a question from, did you answer the last question for both day and night shift? What
yes,
happens to organizations? Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of night shifts, now it's very easy if you think about it, because remember, even if you work shifts, there are certain hours within which you need to work ordinarily. I know this does not apply to doctors, especially interns, who I know sometimes work for 72 hours non-stop. But for regular employees who are on shifts, if you have a shift, let's say from noon to 11 p.m., your out of work hours would be before noon and after 11 p.m. So you can't be called at 7 a.m. in the morning. And in this case, if now, for instance, you're called and you're told someone has not reported their shift and they'd like you to come into their shift, then of course there will be compensation for that. Yeah.
Gosh, it sounds like they are more protected than people in, fluid jobs like management, consultancy and professional jobs, because I mean their work hours are defined, and I think what we've not been doing is defining the work hours for other more fluid engagements, say for example finance, where you can work and work and work. That's how it sounds to me. I have two questions. One is, does the bill consider employees working in global organizations where teams are spread out across the world and they are in different time zones? That's from Carol Masila. And then I have another question from Chris, who says, what needs to happen in Parliament for this bill to pass? And then for me, my last one, it's a bit personal, is what about professional consultancy? Like, for example, you are a lawyer, to client relationships. Does this affect those relationships? So for example, if I am having an engagement, say as a lawyer, and someone calls me, and I'm not talking about criminal law here where you can be called at any time. I'm talking about something in the land's office. Does that protect that relationship, or do we let that go to business matters? Questions for now.
Okay. For employees working in global organizations, of course, this is going to be one of the challenges, right? I think I was having a conversation the other day with someone who, they have offices in the US, they have offices in London, and they have offices in Kenya. And they just happened to share with me their schedule of meetings. And you realize that some of their meetings actually go to almost 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. And this is going to be quite challenging. And I think the only way for that, or rather the only way that can be resolved, is by such organizations creating policies to address this. Part of what I see is that employees, maybe in America, I don't think they would be working extra or beyond those hours as maybe compared to what we would do here. I think many times I find that locally, there'll be people, employees are forced to really almost bend over backwards in a way. But those who are working in such global organizations, it will be very, very key. And I think these are some of the people who will be most affected by this. And employers can make their work very easy by just determining if your boss is in the UK and they wake up, or rather they report to work, the UK, I believe right now is about 3 hours behind us. So is it possible then to change your working hours so that you work on maybe London time instead of working, during Kenyan time? That's one of the easy ways to do it. For the second question, how does the amendment go through? Of course, it has to go through all the readings, and then it will go for a vote. And if it is, if the mover of the bill is able to convince enough of his colleagues and it passes with a vote, then that's it. It automatically becomes law. Of course, there'll be the step where the president has to sign it into law, what we call assent. Now, in this case, in terms of assent, of course, you know that the president has the power to reject a bill and to return it back to parliament so that maybe further work can be done. In this case, the president might say, I do not agree with this bill for the following reasons. And it goes back to parliament and it's worked on. And yeah, that happens. Now, consultants, of course, if you look at the Employment Act only seeks to govern the relationship between employers and employees. As a lawyer to your client, that's not an employer-employee relationship. If you're a consultant, that's not an employer-employee relationship. And you'll notice, for those of you who are consultants, your contracts have a clause there that says, nothing in this contract shall create, or nothing in this agreement shall create an employer-employee relationship. So for such individuals, then you only work now. It's very contractual. It's basically what are we agreeing amongst ourselves. And if you're a consultant and you have a client who likes to call you during such hours, just bill them more. Bill them more for your time. That's how it works. Even for lawyers, if we are called, if you need me to come at midnight, you're my client, I will come, and you will also pay for that time. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. There's a question from Noah Peters. He says, when the bill passes into law, will it act retrospectively to the current clients? And then the second one is from Shalmith, who says, what happens to employees who have contracts stating that they work, let's say, a certain number of hours per week, say 40, without stating the exact time frame of when these 40 hours fall? How will that, I guess she's asking, or he's asking, how will that be affected if this should come into law? And then one last one is, from the previous experiences you've shared from Portugal, from Spain, from Italy, I think, and France, how long did it take? Do you have that information? And were there derailments from, let's say, people like the Federation of Kenyan Employers that we can learn from or take into consideration with this kind of bill?
Okay. With regards to the first question, will the bill act retrospectively? I believe that's the word that was used. Normally for laws will rarely look backwards. So I do not, I can say with a certain authority that this law will begin operating immediately it comes in now moving forward. You cannot backdate it, because you see, if there was no law about the right to disconnect, how then do you come and claim for, in 2021, I worked for this period and it was out of work hours? You understand? So there has to be a right that is created first for you to allege a violation. Of course, there are those, for the second question, there are those who have those unique contracts that say you'll work for X number of hours. The best way to deal with such is you need to be able to keep your timesheets, right? You need to be able to show that for today I worked X number of hours. This day I worked X number of hours. Once you go beyond those hours, then you are now out of work, right? I think when this bill was being prepared, it was more or less, I think the senator in his mind more or less thought of people who work on a fixed time schedule. So that is what it covers. But if you work 40 hours and you've already done your 40 hours and you're now being contracted beyond that, then of course that is out of work. In other countries, how long did it take? France actually passed their law in 2017, I believe. And it's very interesting because most of the nations in Europe, and even just the companies in Europe, are taking this up, even where there is no law, right? For instance, in the UK, that there are companies that actually are providing for out of work. And I think this has to do with the attitude that we have towards work and the difference between the two cultures. For instance, with the French, you cannot try to curtail the rights of employees because the French, based on their history, they have a long history of fighting for, rights of employees. So that's why it was the first country in the world to actually recognize this. And remember, the French were doing it even before COVID came. The French were saying way before COVID came that you should not reply. You don't have to reply to an email that has been sent outside of your working hours. So that's interesting in that way. I do not know whether there have been those cases. Of course, at any given time, you will always have people who take a different approach. And I don't think there's any harm in taking different approaches, right? There are those perhaps who will feel like the FKE feels in Kenya, that this is creating a disruption. It's bringing a disruption, it's causing a disruption, it's making it impossible for us to carry out our work. There'll always be those positions that are taken. However, the difference, I think, between maybe Kenya and countries in Europe is that they have had years, they have had centuries of actually developing their laws and developing labor laws, where you will actually find that some of the issues we're dealing with in Kenya are things that they had to deal with a long time ago. So Kenya, that's why the bill is seen as being very progressive, because for where Kenya is, even in terms of our development, this bill is very, very progressive. It's forward-looking. But you'll also realize that I think Kenyan employees play a big role in developing, especially a lot of technology in the world. Facebook is here, Google is here, Amazon is here, Microsoft is here, and all these people are involved in actually developing some of this technology that is being used sometimes to communicate to people outside of those work hours. So while I think it's Atoli who says that Kenya is not yet at that place, you almost wonder, when do we get there then? Is there a date where we say, okay, now we are developed enough for us to actually introduce this? Yet the reality of the matter is that that's where we are in terms of work. Yeah.
Okay, great answer. I actually noticed that whenever I write to IFC, they write back with a note down there saying that I have chosen to reply your responsibility to respond. If I responded at 2 a.m., it is not your responsibility to match that. And I find that very, very useful. But there is a question here.
Yeah, I got a response like that one day from someone, and I was so shocked. I couldn't believe. I couldn't believe. Yeah, so there, and this actually was an employee of a bank. So even in Kenya, there are actually employers who have these policies already in place in one way or another.
Yeah. There's a question there from Njeri Munen. She says she may have missed it, and I think you talked about this when you're talking about out of work hours and the definition between that and overtime. So maybe you can go a bit more into really describing that in terms of what's the difference between out of work hours and overtime. For example, my boss or employer doesn't contact me, but the nature of my assignment causes me to work past work hours. Maybe you can comment on that one.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Remember, as I said, this will be one of the questions I think that the courts will need to step in and help us define. Remember, as I said, and maybe I think I can share that definition again. Out of work hours means hours other than the hours of work agreed upon between an employer and an employee in the contract of employment. So out of work is any period outside of the agreed period of work. Now, she asked an interesting question, because if you, by your own accord, you take your files and you go home with them, maybe your employer did not tell you to go home with the work, but because of your workload, you know that that work needs to be finished. Do we then say that now that comes under and out of work, or are we dealing with that in terms of overtime? And remember, it used to be very easy to even talk about overtime when employees were in the office, right? Now employees are at home. So if an employee sits in the office until 10, at least they are being seen there. Not all organizations have these systems that are able to track your time. How long were you on your machine? What are you doing? So it's going to be one of those things that will be very dicey, but I think if the bill passes, the court will be able to indicate that. So the short answer is that out of work, I think in the way that this bill envisions, is that you have actually already stepped out of your workstation. You have stepped out of your workstation and you're now being contacted to continue working. Over time, you are still at your workstation, your working hours are over, but you continue to work. That would be the difference between the two. Yeah.
Okay. One last question, and if you have any other questions, please put them on the chat. We wanted to wind up at about in an hour, so we have a few more minutes left. And Richard says, I love the idea that we aren't ripe. So I guess that's he's referring to your conversation around how progressive the bill is. I saw when I was reading up on the bills that have been passed in various areas, and you mentioned Canada, that they are proposing for them that they're going to have a threshold of employees. Is that something that's also proposed here for this bill, like the threshold of companies, or rather the number of employees a company should have to be able to be subject to these rules? Is that something that's going to happen here?
So in these amendments, the number of employees is not a condition. This actually applies to all employers. Even if you have 1, you have 2, you have 10, you have 100. The only difference where numbers of employees actually come up as an issue is where we're talking about the policy. If you have under 10 employees, the employer can create the policy themselves and share it with the employees and tell them this is the policy we have developed. But if you have more than 10 employees, you have to develop the policy in conjunction with them. You actually have to seek their views on some of those areas. Yeah.
So it's about definition of the policies that will govern this bill at the workplace.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So I'm still inviting anyone who has any questions to just come in and feel free to ask us. One last question for me is, I know like in the previous times, we've always had the definition between maybe unionizable employees and employees who are not unionizable. Does this cut across all of them? Does it also give a definition towards possibly preference or lack of preference between those two categories? Or what's the thought, or what's the thinking around this?
Yeah, I think you'll notice that part of what the bill wants to do is to ensure that Section 27A is read in line with Section 10 of the Employment Act. If you look at Section 10 of the Employment Act, it actually provides, for instance, that if you're employed by an organization and there's a CBA in that organization for the role that you're applying for, maybe you've come on contract, in which case maybe you're not part of the union, you are required under the law to actually be informed that the terms of employment for this role, because of the CBA, are 1, 2, and 3. I think for those who read the Law of Work newsletter, I touched on this because it's one of the areas that KCB really fumbled with regards to the clerks. So it does not make that distinction. The only thing it provides is that if the employees are unionizable and they belong to a union, then that policy will be created in conjunction with the union. The union has to be informed that we are developing this policy, and the union will now step in on behalf of the employees to actually carry that out. Where there's no union, then the employees will step in directly. Yeah.
Okay. All right, and there you have it. I think, there's one last question. I think, can an employer compensate an employee for working overtime with time off during normal working hours?
Part of what the policy that will be developed by companies is for them to determine what is compensation. What does compensation amount to? You know, how do we say that this is proper compensation? If you're called during your out of work hours, do we then tell you, because I took 2 hours, tomorrow instead of coming in at 8, come in at 10? So that will be left to the businesses themselves and the employers together with the employees to make those decisions. But often when we talk about compensation, we're talking about financial, it has to be a financial exchange. Yeah.
So my last, okay, I know I keep saying my last question, but then you keep saying something that
like a
makes me
pastor.
think about,
You know, pastors
like
are
a pastor.
yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking along. For example, right now, maybe me and you're my boss and I'm working for you, and we have a really good relationship. So I'm calling you at odd hours, and we, you know, there's this kind of chemistry that's going on that we are so happy with. And then one day something changes. Can I come and then sue you for making me work after hours because we didn't follow the contract or the law, but not because we didn't want to. We just felt it was worth it. Maybe we had something that we were pursuing that was beneficial to both of us. So how will that work? Or how do you see that playing out? Is that a point of weakness so that when you see things going too well, you tell yourself, a potential pitfall?
Yeah. There's something we say among commercial lawyers that contracts are wartime documents made in a time of peace. That contract, you will never rely on it until you need to rely on it. And that's why we always encourage that they have to be watertight. One of the things I always tell my clients is that it's human nature to actually operate on a case-by-case basis when it comes to how we deal with matters of employment or how we deal with employees. But you always have to remember that in cases are falling out and this matter goes to court, the employment court is a human rights court. That's the first thing. It's there to actually—
it's a human rights court.
It's a human rights court, which means that when an employee makes an allegation, right? For instance, an employee says, and this even happens now, let's use a live example like leave days. If an employee goes to court today and they say they've never taken leave since they worked for you, the burden shifts to you, the employer, to actually show that this person took leave. And if you're unable to prove that, then the law is on their side. You never give them leave, and you have to pay them for those leave days. So like you said, maybe you work with people in that sense. You just go for leave. Go for a week, but nothing is ever written. There are no leave forms, nothing. It comes back to bite you in that sense. So employers, part of what employers also have to do is you have to ensure that your HR's team— I know we hire HR personnel and they're there to deal with all the challenges that emanate from employment. But the employment landscape, Vicky, is changing daily in such dramatic ways. And every day there are decisions that are coming from there. And HR personnel are not lawyers. They're not going to read a 30-page judgment to understand what the court is doing. So the encouragement to employers is always ensure that you're upskilling your team. Upskill your team. You need to work with a legal team that is willing to actually hold your hand, that is willing to update you on the latest happenings, a legal team that is able to come to your offices and train people. You need to have a lawyer you can actually just give a call and say, hey, this is happening. This is what you're thinking of doing. What do you advise? That is very key. And especially for the debts or for your business, because, you know, a business is a commercial enterprise anyway.
Yeah. So
for instance, like now you have seen the BBC documentary with regards to tea pickers at James Njeri. And, you know, the reality is that these companies are going to suffer huge losses because of things that were done, right? And this thing, maybe the management was not aware that these things were happening, maybe they were aware, But you wonder, what did they do? You know, did this ever come to their knowledge? And the losses suffered are significant. You know, these are huge losses, and not many businesses are able to deal with that. So please, if you're running a business, if you're an employer, if you're a HR personnel and you have people you're managing in a company, you need to always engage your lawyer, and you need to be able to build a relationship with your lawyers where you can always call upon them. And even as you call upon them, you pay them on time and you pay them well, so that the relationship is balanced. You know, it's not only on one side.
Yeah.
Because you remember, as I said, as a consultant, I can't tell you this is out of work hours. So sometimes I'll take your call, but it helps that relationship really needs to be there. And I think also for you, Vicky, and for profiles, maybe now we need to start also just thinking about what more training can be done for HR professionals, especially because of the many changes that are coming from our courts. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Gosh, you just hit the nail when you said 30 pages of a judgment. My God. We're not going to read that. And yes, I guess in human talent, you're looking more towards the employee, the welfare of the employee. The fine print may get lost in the details. And so we might not know how to fight back, even if we have a case. And a word of caution to us, of course, when it's sunny and we're making hay, things will always go well. But process is there for something, and process is there, and policies are there to actually safeguard everyone, so that we are not going to human rights activities. I think there are no more questions, but from me, James, is to really thank you for sharing your time with us and to talk about this matter. I do feel I personally have really gained a lot. And I think from what I'm seeing from the comments, feel free to put in your comments on the chat, everyone, and thank James. Yeah, I was just thinking to myself, gosh, you really haven't changed. Goodness. The Lord has been good to you.
That's what we want to hear.
That's what you want to hear, yes. But we must really thank you for always sharing your words of advice with us. And I always share it on the forums because I feel they are useful for us to know, because we are not in law. And if you do want to get in touch with James, his address is there, legal@jnadvocates.com. We're going to share this presentation with everyone who registered and also everyone who joined. We're also going to share this recording, as is our tradition, with all of you. So feel free to also share with others. And in case you need anything to do with law, please contact him. He said he'll pick your calls even at midnight, as long as you compensate and make his time worthy. And I can actually tell you, yes, he's a very reliable person, and he will be with you all the step. James, any last words? Maybe last words of advice before we leave?
It's good. This is out of work for most people.
Yes, it is.
So just grateful for everyone who was able to attend. Thank you for making time. I see a lot of familiar names and faces in some instances. Thank you for just making time. And thank you, Vicky, for the help and for the support, and just even for making this possible. I know we've been talking about this for some time, and I'm just glad that we finally found an opportunity for collaboration. Yeah, thank you, and God bless you all.
God bless you all. If you have any topics you want to tackle, just write to us or at info@profiles.co.ke. And let's see if we can convince James to come back for another session, even as we see how we can create meaningful trainings that are not 30 pages long on the law. So I think I'll wish everyone a good evening and wish you God's blessings, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. James, I'm calling you on WhatsApp.
Okay, so.